You are listening to Uranium Spotlight, your weekly podcast on the forces shaping the global uranium fuel market, sponsored by PurePoint Uranium Group. Uranium Spotlight isn't just a podcast, it's a platform. Visit purepoint.ca to access in-depth market briefings, sector analysis, and the inaugural Behind the Curve report, understanding when and how the uranium market turns. If uranium matters to you, you're in the right place. And now, your host, Chris Frostad.
It's July 7th, 2026, and this week on Uranium Spotlight, a critical part failure sidelines two of Cameco's flagship Saskatchewan operations at once. India and Australia edge towards a supply arrangement that raises hard questions about where the U.S. fits into the global uranium picture, and Denison clears a major hurdle for its Wheeler River project in the Athabasca Basin. The spot uranium price closed last week at $84.95 a pound, U3O8, essentially flat after opening the week at $85.05. With the U.S. Independence Day holiday and the start of summer vacation season falling in the same stretch, trading on both sides of the market was thin, and only a handful of transactions cleared over the full week. When volume drops that low, a 10-cent move in either direction shouldn't be read as a signal about where sentiment is heading. The more telling activity continues to sit in the term market, which has stayed unusually busy for what's normally a quiet stretch of summer. Multiple utilities are actively evaluating offers, reviewing responses to requests for information, or sitting in direct discussions with suppliers, with delivery windows stretching from 2027 out toward 2040 in some cases. That's a lot of forward planning happening at once, and it tells you utilities are looking well past this week's spot print. The long-term price indicator has continued to climb, another sign that locking in multi-year supply is getting more expensive, not less. That backdrop matters more this week than usual because the supply side of the ledger just got tighter. Two of Cameco's Saskatchewan operations are now offline at the same time, and that comes against a wider picture of Canadian production hiccups, an Australian industry still constrained by mining bans in most of its states, and Eastern buyers continuing to lock up production out of Central Asia and Africa. None of that shows up cleanly in a single week spot number, but it's exactly the kind of pressure that accumulates quietly until it doesn't. For investors, the key takeaway is that a flat, holiday-thin spot price shouldn't be mistaken for a flat market. The term market, where the real supply-demand balance actually gets negotiated, keeps tightening even while the daily ticker sits still. Cameco and Urano have jointly confirmed that operations at the McClean Lake Mill and at Cameco's Cigar Lake Mine have both been suspended after a critical component at the mill failed and needs to be replaced. The part in question is an expansion joint used in the mill's sulfuric acid plant, and sulfuric acid is what actually strips U3O8 out of Cigar Lake's ore. Without it, the mill can't process anything. A replacement is already on its way from Cameco's Key Lake operation, and the current estimate is that the mill will be down for about 2 weeks while repairs are completed. Because Cigar Lake has only limited capacity to store mined but unprocessed ore, Cameco had little choice but to suspend mining there as well until the mill is back online and can start working through the backlog. Cameco says it doesn't currently expect the shutdown to affect its 2026 production outlook, though that assumption holds only if the repair stays on schedule. Urano, for its part, has been quick to note that outages of this length are rare at McClean Lake, with the last comparable disruption more than a decade ago. The timing compounds an already difficult year for Cameco's Saskatchewan operations. McArthur River ran at reduced capacity for nearly a month this past May after flooding, its downstream of the Key Lake Mill being knocked offline by the collapse of the Smoothstone River Bridge. Analysts had estimated that a full month of that access disruption could have cost Cameco as much as 1.5 million pounds of production. In the end, the outage ran closer to 16 days. Now, with Cigar Lake sidelined for at least 2 more weeks, Cameco is facing a second round of lost output in the same stretch of the year, and mines don't simply switch back on at full capacity once repairs are finished. Ramping back up takes time. This is happening as Canada absorbs these production hiccups. Australia remains constrained by mining bans across 6 of its 8 states and territories, and Eastern buyers keep absorbing a growing share of production out of Kazakhstan, Niger, Namibia, and Uzbekistan. Utilities have historically been insulated from uranium price swings since fuel is a small piece of the total cost of running a reactor. But that insulation has limits. Cameco's own leadership has noted that the company is now signing long-term contracts averaging roughly $120 a pound, and if long-term prices push meaningfully past the $100 mark and stay there, the comfort utilities have taken for granted starts to erode. For investors, the key takeaway is that supply-side disruptions like this one rarely move the spot price much on their own, but they chip away at the Western world's already thin margin for error. Every week a major mine sits idle is a week of lost pounds that has to be made up somewhere else, at a time when the somewhere else options are shrinking. India's government has confirmed its intent to sign a uranium supply agreement with Australia during an upcoming trade visit, a deal that makes obvious geographic and geopolitical sense. The two countries sit closer together than, say, Canada and India, share similar democratic systems of government, and are both part of the Quad Alliance alongside Japan and the United States. On paper, it's a natural fit. But the timing raises a broader question. India has already signed its willing to absorb a large share of Canada's uranium output, a process that appears to have started in earnest during a trade visit with Prime Minister Mark Carney back in March. If India also becomes a major buyer of Australia's comparatively modest production, and Canada continues signing nuclear cooperation supply agreements with European countries, including Poland and Czechia, the practical question becomes unavoidable. Where does the United States, still the world's largest reactor operator with a fleet of 94 units, plan to source its uranium? Meanwhile, China and Russia continue absorbing large volumes of production out of Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Namibia, and Russia in particular has effectively secured political influence over Niger's uranium sector for the time being. Against that backdrop, the U.S. has not announced a single major new uranium supply agreement in months, even as the rest of the world moves to lock up available production. Kazatomprom's CEO recently noted that the company's eastern customers are simply less price-averse than their western counterparts. That comment invites an uncomfortable question. Are U.S. utilities so price-averse that they're effectively unwilling to buy at current levels, betting instead that prices will retreat? History suggests that's a risky bet. Long-term prices have shown little sign of reversing, and U.S. inventories aren't deep enough to comfortably wait out a prolonged standoff. At some point, U.S. utilities will likely need to buy regardless of where the prices sit, and the longer that purchasing decision is delayed, the more expensive and less certain the eventual supply is likely to be. For investors, the key takeaway is that the global contracting race isn't waiting for the United States to catch up. Every agreement signed elsewhere narrows the pool of uncommitted supply available to Western utilities that have so far stayed on the sidelines. Denison Mines has resolved one of the last outstanding obstacles to its Wheeler River project, with the Peter Ballantine Cree Nation formally withdrawing its judicial review application against the Saskatchewan government's environmental assessment approval for the Phoenix in situ recovery mine. In its place, PBCN has now given its formal consent to and support for the development and operation of Wheeler River, following further engagement between the two parties on concerns about the project's impact on traditional territory. Wheeler River is the largest undeveloped uranium project in the infrastructure-rich eastern Athabasca Basin, hosting the high-grade Phoenix and Griffin deposits, discovered by Denison in 2008 and 2014. Phoenix already holds both its provincial environmental assessment approval and a construction license from the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, granted this past February. The site preparation began in March, with first production still targeted for 2028. Notably, Denison also holds an ownership stake in the McLean Lake Mill, the same facility at the center of this week's Cameco and Orano mill outage, giving the company direct exposure to both sides of the region's production infrastructure. Community consent matters here for reasons that go beyond goodwill. Permitting delays tied to unresolved opposition have stalled or slowed projects across the industry, and a withdrawn legal challenge removes a source of uncertainty that could otherwise have clouded Wheeler River's path forward, construction, and production. PBCN's agreement also secures the nation a supervisory role in community-based environmental monitoring, along with job and business opportunities tied to the project, the kind of structure that tends to hold up better over a mine's life than approval obtained over local objection. For investors, the key takeaway is that Wheeler River's 2028 production target now looks a little more secure. In a jurisdiction already prized for its grade and its infrastructure, removing a legal and community obstacle is exactly the kind of quiet de-risking that makes a project easier to finance and easier to build on schedule.
You've been listening to Uranium Spotlight, your weekly podcast dedicated to the latest developments shaping the uranium fuel market and its role in the global energy landscape, sponsored by Pure Point Uranium Group. While our passion for the sector is undeniable, nothing discussed here should be considered investment advice. Our mission is to provide a clear, balanced view of the forces influencing uranium prices and the nuclear fuel cycle. For deeper analysis and market briefings, visit purepoint.ca. Join us again next Tuesday for another edition of Uranium Spotlight.